Hello and welcome back to a video series on the Anapanasati Sutta. Um, Last video was pretty long. It was running at about an hour. I'm not meaning to make these so long. I missed setting a timer on the last couple ones. And then the first one was sort of a initiatory video, so I was okay with it being, I think it's about 40 minutes. Anyways, very long video and still didn't quite get all the way through what I had intended to in regards to the seven Bojjhangas, seven factors of enlightenment. These factors that are necessary for enlightenment, necessary for awakening, contribute to a very potent inner substance. There is language for these kinds of concepts. I don't know that I want to adopt anyone else's. The Buddha doesn't really define a language for the way I'm trying to frame it, like saying like this structured environment that we're building inside. He does in a way, not in the way that I am. They didn't really have chemistry and the like. In India at the time, they had a totally different way of looking at things. But it appeals to me. I think it appeals very much to our modern science, anatomy, physiology, to really recognize, in his teachings, everything that we've talked about so far. Which is what these seven factors are. They are the factors that need to be present. They are the chemical elements that you will need to make this wicked brew called samadhi, which after you chug enough of it results in major awakening. Haha, it's kind of fun and funny. Anyhow, so there is a major balancing factor to seven factors. And then I also want to get a little more into how they're spoken of directly out of the Anapanasati Sutta. So we're going to go from the Majjhima Nikaya, which I have right over here, open to the Anapanasati, to the Samyutta Nikaya, wherein the Buddha talks a little bit about this. He draws a simile? He does. He makes a simile. I had talked earlier in this same segment about he uses a simile of fire at times and the extinguishing of it. He also uses similes about how to make fire, which it really gives a perfect image. So in the seven factors, we of course have mindfulness as the initiatory. When we start with mindfulness, it's how everything else comes when we're directing our attention, our mindfulness, our awareness to whatever. We begin with mindfulness. Next comes the investigation. From investigation, energy. A lot of bodily energy, mental energy arises when we start really investigating. That energy enlivens us. It causes pleasure. It causes rapture, which can over-escalate us. Right there is what this sutta is going to start talking about. The other three factors, they are a duality to those. They are a balancing factor to those, all governed by mindfulness in the middle and in the beginning. So I had talked in the last video about how we establish mindfulness, we start to investigate. In the Anapanasati Sutta, the Buddha actually says, speaks of it as investigating just mindfulness in and of itself, the state of mindfulness, which has a lot of implications. I had talked about investigating the mind dhammas, or the fourth foundation of mindfulness, satipatthana, which is labeled in both of these suttas as impermanence, cessation, fading away, and relinquishment. All good, juicy stuff. But investigation can be directed And all of these things, you can investigate right intention, you can investigate right speech. There's also a time when investigation needs to be hushed and brought down to where we're just being present. So you can kind of get stuck in it too. It's not so much what we're getting into, because most of us are in a place where we need to do more investigating to start seeing things more clearly. 99% of what we're going to be doing in our meditation practice is trying to get clear, and then once we have more clarity, just sit in it. If you can get into a really deep state of samadhi, just soak in that, steep in it. So in this sutta, the Buddha, this is in the connected discourses on the seven factors of enlightenment in the Samyutta Nikaya. The Samyutta Nikaya is the connected discourses of the Buddha. Majjhima is middle length. And then you have Digha, which is long, and Anguttara, which is numerical. All different ways of organizing so many teachings that we have available to us. In this sutta, the Buddha likens, well, first I'll say he's giving a method of meditation with the seven factors, where there's a tendency in the mind when we're meditating. We sit down, we meditate, and we're either restless. Everything's duality, right? Everything kind of goes in two different directions. There's balancing that needs to happen everywhere. What can happen is we either kind of start to fall asleep because we've done a good job and we've calmed ourselves and we've kind of settled, or it's just too early in the morning and we haven't woken up yet, and we kind of start to fall asleep. There's a sluggishness to us. The other thing that can happen is we can have a restlessness. So the Buddha is saying a way of using the seven factors in our meditation practice. This is a little bit outside of Anapanasati, but we're going to come back to how it's spoken of in that teaching. But this is just kind of juicy, and it's about the seven factors. So I had mentioned their duality, their two sides, and I wanted to clarify that because it is really useful to use it in this way. So the other thing is restlessness. We can be restless. Now the three factors below mindfulness. Mindfulness is sort of neutral. We can think of it as neutral in this way of looking at the Bojjhangas. So investigation, energy, and rapture. Just kind of feel those, taste those with your mentality. There's energy to those, right? Tranquility, concentration, and equanimity. That's your water. The other are your fire, to do our chemistry here, right? So the Buddha is saying, when you find yourself sluggish or kind of like, or there's not a lot of energy, there's not a lot of inspiration, maybe you're nodding off. It happens a lot, especially in the beginning of practice, and all throughout practice. You can have meditations where you're just kind of like, you're not all the way there, almost gonna like sink into like a theta brainwave state, but then you just fall right through to just unconscious snoring. And he's saying in this sutta, if you're in a sluggishness and you're trying to practice concentration, or you're trying to, build tranquility, you're trying to get to a tranquil spot, or equanimity, any of those three, it's like trying to make a fire with a wet log. It's like, you're already soaking wet. It's not going to work. You need to dry out. So he's saying, if there's sluggishness, direct your attention to investigating. Try and like wake yourself up and get curious about something, or try and bring up some energy, or try and focus on pleasure is probably an easier way to start bringing up the energy. Is to direct ourselves towards those. If there's too much energy, if we're a little restless in the mind, if it's hard to settle and concentrate, we want to be developing the other side of the seven factors. We want to be tranquilizing. We want to be trying to concentrate, become collected, mindfulness, presence here, and equanimity. A lot of times the mind will be restless because of a like a lack of equanimity. Equality, equalization is sort of part of the root of the word of equanimity. Equalness. So there might be an unbalance there, a discontent in the body, with our sitting posture, in our lives, in our work, our environment, our mentality, in our psyche, in memories of the past, worries about the future, monetary worries. Gosh, don't we all have those? Maybe not all of us, but a lot of us do, right? So many things that we're not in equanimity with, that we haven't balanced with. So, and these hoodwink us, these start operating us, they're pulling all the levers back here and we're just going with it. And it's hard to kind of sometimes notice, but if we can just notice that there's a restless, and then we can investigate from there, or get curious there, notice from there, what is that about? And we see there's something that we're not really at ease with, that we can start to direct our intention to let go of, like, I'm gonna die soon, I can't do anything about this situation, or I can and I'm not. Whatever needs to be done, that's your part of the practice, is wisely looking at things in how they really are. What is the wise thing to do? Things are impermanent. What can you do about them? What can you not do about them? Nothing is definitive for your life. You're the definitive voice for your life. There are ways to make your life better. There's also deep practices to look at, in the end result. We can always have peace, because the end result, whether you make your life, better or not, you're also going to die. So why waste today feeling bad, no matter how it is? You can always have at least some peace. There's at least that to start to initiate from. Beyond that, this practice is not about trusting someone else. This practice is not about, having all the answers of your particular situation. It's giving a framework of wisely looking. And once you learn that framework, you make it personal, you make it your own, where we're getting deeply in touch with our own intuition, our own cosmic connection, our own inborn wisdom and brilliance. So a lot of those questions it's for you to answer, but this is a system of looking at, what's going on in the mind. There's restlessness, there's a cause. What is the cause? Everything is conditioned. Major part of these teachings, everything is conditioned. That's what we're talking about in Anapanasati, is we're using the breath to create the conditions for clarity. We have to do this because it's conditioned to arise. Everything has a condition for arising. And that's for you to investigate in yourself. It's for all of us to be investigating in these teachings. So that balancing factor of the 7 factors, it can be a really wonderful tool. And also, I will say the 7 factors, it can be kind of like advanced, maybe like way up there. What we really want to just be doing is like chilling out in this culture, just practicing mindfulness, just getting to a point where we have gotten really good at, we come in, we sit down on our cushion, and it's like, okay, we can be in this room without having our minds just run us all around, all over the place. And also to have some clarity in our emotional world, or just some balance. That is a huge achievement in this practice. That's the primary what we're doing. Because if you can, sit down, on your cushion and be like, okay, I'm going to establish all 7 factors of enlightenment. It's like, you got tough luck, you're already wanting something. And there's something about existence. It's always going to defy you. It will. You have to sit to do nothing except be present. And it's the natural course, is that when mindfulness is established consistently on the body, the feelings, the mind, and mind states or mind dhammas. Then these foundations are established. Then the seven factors naturally arise. The mind begins to investigate once it's settled. There's a lot less doing than we Westerners are used to in our world. We're totally calibrated and oriented at doing, right? This is very much in a different direction. There's a lot of settling and allowing that needs to happen. So don't get too hung up on seven factors. If they're not coming to you or you don't feel any of them, just let it go. But keep them in your mind for when they do show up, and recognize them when they do. Recognize which ones. If you have like, if you do all of a sudden, you're like, I'm really like, this is tranquility. Like, wow, I'm like really chill. Then balance it out, then commit the seven factors, commit all this to memory if you can. Commit the seven factors and, think, okay, what's the balancing factor to tranquility? It's energy. Or is it rapture? They each have a counterpart, and that's something that I have actually skipped over. So investigation's exact counterpart is concentration. The investigation is the actual doing, the rolling over, the divulging of things, the figuring them out. Concentration is less, it doesn't wander, it stays put. So those directly balance each other. It could be equanimity and energy, or equanimity and rapture, tranquility and rapture, or tranquility and energy. I believe, it's tranquility and energy, because equanimity is sort of outside of rapture and pleasure. It is it's the like beyond tranquility, beyond states of pleasure or pain. It's true balance. It's water in the the table of chemical elements. It's the perfect half of the perfect middle, which is why it's the end of the seven factors of enlightenment. Beyond concentration, synonymous with the goal of these practices, which is enlightenment, which is pure balance, the middle way. The Buddha's path is called the middle way. So the rapture is definitely sort of the opposite of equanimity. So if you have equanimity, notice, is there joy though? Is joy accessible to me? Because you might be you have the close danger in equanimity is to not care about anyone, right? And that's not what we're cultivating. So if you're in a state of equanimity, check, is there a rapture? Is there a joy? Is there, life? If you're in tranquility, the close danger of being tranquil is to kind of fall asleep or kind of like zone out. So notice, okay, I'm tranquil. Add some energy to it too. And that builds, that those aid each other. And because they're before concentration, those work to bring the mind to concentration. The energy allows you to concentrate. The tranquility balances it back down to where you can stay in that, but not just, sink and then lose momentum. So they have that balance to them. Okay, now I'm going to come back to the Anapanasati Sutta. I'm going to go ahead and read directly from this so that you're hearing the words of the stages of them. And then also we're going to talk about the end. We're finally getting to the end of this sutta. So I will just dive in and read this to you. And how bhikkhus do the four foundations of mindfulness, developed and cultivated, fulfill the seven factors of enlightenment. Bhikkhus, on whatever occasion a bhikkhu abides contemplating the body as a body, ardent, fully aware, and mindful, having put away covetousness and grief for the world, on that occasion, unremitting mindfulness is established in him. On whatever occasion unremitting mindfulness is established in a bhikkhu, on that occasion the mindfulness enlightenment factor is aroused in him, and he develops it, and by development it comes to fulfillment in him. So he's talking about mindfulness of the body. If this can also apply to, and he goes on to this later in the sutta, mindfulness of feelings, mindfulness of mind. No matter what we're being mindful of, it's in this way that when we have this unremitting mindfulness, we're fully doing this, mindfulness is becoming established. When we're practicing in this way, it's sort of the beginning. Abiding thus mindful, he goes on, once there's this mindfulness, abiding thus mindful, he investigates and examines that state with wisdom and embarks on a full inquiry into it. On whatever occasion, abiding thus mindful, a bhikkhu investigates and examines that state with wisdom and embarks upon a full inquiry into it. On that occasion, the investigation of states enlightenment factor is aroused in him, and he develops it. And by development, it comes to fulfillment in him. So he's saying, where we've established mindfulness, now that there is mindfulness, we start investigating this state of being mindful. So this is where I was talking about this natural growth out, that once there's mindfulness, investigation can come. You can't investigate something if your mind is hijacking you and making you think about burritos. It's not going to happen. You're not going to investigate anything except maybe, a imagining of eating a burrito. But we're not going to get done what we want done without the mindfulness. Mindfulness has to be established, and it's also the next sort of natural thing is for an investigation, this natural curiosity to awaken once we have this faculty of mindfulness there. In one who investigates and examines that state with wisdom, this state of mindfulness, investigating, and embarks on a full inquiry into it, tireless energy is aroused. On whatever occasion tireless energy is aroused in a bhikkhu who investigates and examines that state with wisdom and embarks on a full inquiry into it, on that occasion the energy enlightenment factor is aroused in him, and he develops it, and by development it comes to fulfillment in him. So he's talking about developing these things and having them come to fulfillment in them. I liken this to sort of the cognizing of them and nurturing them, nurturing that energy. These things happen. These things happen without us knowing. When we learn about the 7 factors, if we've already been practicing, we can look in hindsight and be like, hey, yeah, no, that I went through that. Yeah, I had like all this energy. Oh, wow. And that's why sometimes in hindsight you can see, yeah, and I was sort of investigating the state. I was kind of balanced. Mindfulness was there. I was kind of getting curious about something. And then all of a sudden I just felt like really like into my meditation. That was the energy that arose. So these naturally come, but the develops it so that it comes to fulfillment in him or her, of course, is that we're noticing it as it's happening and we're helping it along. We are making it as strong and stable as possible. We're like cheering them on, sort of speak, I guess you could think of it as. We're developing these things. We're developing them. We're habituating them. We're strengthening these faculties and these factors. In one who has aroused energy, unworldly rapture arises. So when you have energy, you feel good, you feel vital, you feel alive. This is the real beautiful part of it. It's sort of our carrot on the stick of, we get mindful, we start investigating stuff, we stay as balanced, as equanimous as we can before even equanimity arises in these 7 factors. so that we can, just wisely investigate. And then the energy arises from that. And then this rapture, this really great feeling of vitality comes up out of it. In one who is aroused energy, unworldly rapture arises. On whatever occasion unworldly rapture arises in a bhikkhu who has aroused energy, on that occasion, rapture, enlightenment factor is aroused in him. This has happened. When this happens, that's it. It's born now. And we develop it. And by that development, it comes to fulfillment in us. In one who is rapturous, the body and the mind become tranquil. When you feel good, your body relaxes. Your mind stops running in circles. When you feel rapture, when you feel pleasure, when you feel good, when you have this vitality, everything settles. That's where tranquility comes from. In one who is rapturous, the body and the mind become tranquil. On whatever occasion the body and the mind become tranquil in a bhikkhu who is rapturous, on that occasion tranquility, enlightenment factor is aroused in him. And we develop it. And through that development, it comes to fulfillment in us. We see it. We recognize that when I become mindful, when I disconnect, uninvest from things, get curious about them, exercise my intelligence, stay balanced, start investigating, natural energy arises in me when I'm investigating things instead of saying I already know how everything is and disliking it or finding fault in it or wanting this part and not that part. Really getting sort of a spiritual maturity to us where, we can all have our preferences. They're naturally going to arise, but not justifying our ends and our means by our preferences and our desires and our cravings. These things all happen. We recognize that this rapture comes. Rapture comes from this. And then this settling, this tranquility, these things. This is how these things arise. This is the science of how these things arise in us. We don't get tranquil by having all the money. We don't get tranquil by having a huge house and perfect absolute stability in a completely unstable existence that is always roiling and bubbling and changing. And whoops, I accidentally, ripped this continent apart and separated from you from your whole family. Ha. We see this in great movies all the time where, our hero, he loses his superpowers, or the girl leaves him, and he goes through his trial where he realizes in the end that it's all okay. This is that place of not reaching out anymore, finding that these things come from within. So tranquility, in one whose body is tranquil and who feels pleasure, the mind becomes concentrated. When there is pleasure and we are tranquil, it's easy to just direct the mind to something. When there's no preferencing, I don't want to concentrate on my math homework, or I don't want to concentrate on my feelings. When there's enough pleasure already there, it's kind of like, you can kind of think about like a drug-induced state. Like if you're all junked up on heroin, you're like, yeah, you could cut my arm off. I mean, that's extreme, but it's a simile. And forgive me if it's a brash one, but it's just when we have this inborn joy and this balance, this tranquility with our lives, with our situations, we're not inhibited to say, oh no, I don't want this experience. I don't, I'm going to bounce off of, the things that I don't want to deal with, face, think about, that are uncomfortable for me, that are painful for me. So much compassion with these things, but also we have this ability to face them when we perfect this inner chemistry. And there is joy and there is tranquility. The Buddha is telling us the mind becomes naturally concentrated. So you hear a lot in Western teachings, our word concentration in English, it's not the same word as samadhi in Pali. But it is this very collected ability to direct the mind and stay, perfectly on topic or perfectly present. It's sort of this Zen flavored, concentration. We're not just like on task, concentration where we have to. It's a warm, resonant type of far-reaching concentration. Shoot, where was I going with that? Well, as the sutta continues, in one whose body is tranquil and who feels pleasure, the mind becomes concentrated. On whatever occasion the mind becomes concentrated in a bhikkhu whose body is tranquil and who feels pleasure, on that occasion the concentration enlightenment factor is aroused in him, and he develops it, and by development it comes to fulfillment. And now we're coming to finally the end. He closely looks on with equanimity at the mind thus concentrated. On whatever occasion a bhikkhu closely looks on with equanimity at the mind thus concentrated, it's kind of obvious, at this point, because he said, this from this comes. Once this is here, that's it. It's here. On that occasion, when you're looking on with equanimity at the mind concentrated, on that occasion, yeah, equanimity is there. That factor is aroused and we develop it. And by that development, it comes to fulfillment in us. We help these things to grow and blossom inside of ourselves. So at the beginning, he says, he closely looks on with equanimity at the mind concentrated. There are books on bhikkhunis. These are the nuns. It was very dangerous for them to ordain at the time in India, so long ago. There was major, sexist, twisted, men in power, women don't have power kind of stuff going on. In the Buddha's time, of course, too. And he was very hesitant. Women came to him and said, please let us learn these things. And he's like, I really don't want to get you killed at first. But he developed, I believe he developed so much, like people respected him so much that he was able to kind of take a group of women and be like, okay, I'm going to take you over here in the woods and you're going to have your own little section. We're going to keep you safe. And yes, and there's some amazing suttas of enlightened women, enlightened nuns, monks, who became enlightened in his day, and poetry that came out of them that was just so graceful, brilliant, and penetrating deep. So it is there in the traditional Pali Canon. We don't hear a lot of it. So forgive the connotation of sex and gender. It's just words. What we're really talking about is the human soul. All souls can access and experience these things. But he says, we look on with equanimity at the mind thus concentrated. So once the mind is concentrated, there's always this flavor of this arises and we step out of it, and this arises and we step out of it, and this arises and we step out of it in the Buddhist teachings. The blips, they come along. I had a feeling like this. I am letting it go. I am seeing it as an arising in this. I am not taking it to be myself. I am not clinging. I am not attaching. I'm not letting this rope into myself. We're sort of constantly shedding. This is where the image of 1,000-petaled lotus ever in blossom comes from. It's this lotus flower that's constantly shedding petals and growing new ones. That's an analogy for the mind, for the awakened mind. This constant release of what is coming up in the body. Because these emotions, they're impermanent. What our awareness is impermanent. What we're conscious of is impermanent. Everything is constantly moving through unless we attach to it, and then we die with it. We suffer as it decays. That's what's happening. Is our mind is just a mirror, a reflection of the things we're becoming cognizant of through the movement of time, of space-time, and we're just clinging. Because of that, we suffer. And it works with subtle things, with small things, and with the big things in life. is that as we notice them arise and we stay in our power seat, in our seat of awareness, not letting these things evoke self in us, is what it is all coming down to. Attaching our value to them, or taking these things to be us and our life, our death, our meaning, our purpose. So this happens here at the end of the seven Bhujangas. The mind becomes concentrated, and then we look at the mind thus concentrated with equipoise, with equanimity. The mind is concentrated, and we notice that too. We notice it maintaining balance. This equanimity sort of overwatches our concentration now. We have this concentration faculty in the mind that can be directed, and we just stay really still with that. And we just let those energies really, really take root in here. So the Buddha goes through these stages of the seven factors of enlightenment in relation to contemplating the body, a mindfulness of the body, and then investigation, or it's mindfulness of feelings, and then investigation, or it's mindfulness of mind, and then investigations. Very systematic, the way the suttas are written. And it's an implication of, and this applies also to this part of the whole teaching. And it's a lot, it's very wordy, so they're usually sort of segmented or, put in brief so that we know it applies to all these things too. So he goes through to do that. And in the end, he says, because this is how the four foundations of mindfulness, when developed and cultivated, will fulfill the seven factors of enlightenment. When we practice mindfulness of the body in this way, as in the first and second videos, this is where it goes. So, why breathe? This is why. The breath anchors, steadiness, all these things, and the end result is this place of equanimity at the end of the seven factors, where we have now usurped sort of our power back, or rather we've stopped giving away our power to our senses, our body, our eyes, nose, ears, our cravings, our desires, our preferences, perceptions, likes and dislikes, which are really just so elusive. There's such an illusion. They're quickly fading. It's just an experience, and the experience, this experience of being deeply collected within ourselves, this restraint and refrain. It's so much more pleasurable. It's so much more satisfying. This steadiness that we can experience than this pursuit. But it's this habituation. Where does this habituation to crave, to reach out and desire come from? Very much from a sense of self, wanting to establish itself, because if we're not a self, that's scary. We don't really exist. We're just a pile of circumstances. We seem to be the same person from day to day, but we're not, and that's malleable. What it really is that we wake up the same person every day because we want to. Because if we didn't wake up the same person every day, people would think we were crazy. We would think we were crazy. We would have no ground to stand on. We would have no stability in our lives. It's scary not to wake up and force yourself to be the same person every day, because if you could wake up and be something completely different, well, then anything would be possible, right? And that needs our attention. That needs our samatha, our calming. We need some kind of anchor to get us to wherever the Buddha is talking about, whatever this enlightenment is. And that is this stability to, everything can change. Everything can orbit around this one center point, a center of a golden spiral that can never be approached through the infinite number sequence that is the golden ratio, but through the geometry we can isolate it. We can triangulate through the geometry, through the pattern of what's going on. We can start to realize This pattern applies no matter what part of the universe we look at it. This is the indicative essence of fractals, fractal mathematics, fractal geometry, the esoteric, alchemical and beyond Stoic teachings of as above, so below. Is these things are in us and outside of us. Golden ratio is really great. It describes, our bodies too. It's also describing our mind, describing our consciousness. Our consciousness is endless in that same way, and we can triangulate it. That's what makes geometry sacred, is it's showing us something. We can't know this with language, with words. We can't pinpoint it by trying to, but we can have a realization of it. Okay, so in end, 7 factors of enlightenment, and this is the last paragraph finally of the sutta, and how bhikkhus do the 7 factors of enlightenment, developed and cultivated, fulfill true knowledge and deliverance. So true knowledge is the knowledge of things as they are, enlightenment, and deliverance is the liberation of the heart, the liberation, our freedom from the crutch, the chains of craving, which chain us to suffering. We look outside, it's gonna fail us, and we suffer. It's a simple pattern. It's obvious. It is happening. This is what we want deliverance from. So true knowledge and deliverance, in essence, is the Buddha's description of becoming enlightened. So how do the 7 factors get us to enlightenment, is what he's saying right here. Here, a bhikkhu develops the mindfulness enlightenment factor, which is supported by seclusion, dispassion, and cessation, and ripens in relinquishment. He goes on to say he develops the investigation enlightenment factor, the energy factor, the rapture and factor, tranquility factor, concentration and factor, equanimity factor. All of these is what he's saying. All the factors of enlightenment, they're supported by seclusion, stepping away from our world, our culture, our consumerism. It doesn't matter about our modern culture. It's about the ancient culture too. It's also about our senses. He's talking about 100% seclusion. So one aspect of the term seclusion applies to secluding our mind and our hearts from the senses. Our eyes are very susceptible to the minute we see an attractive person. We have feelings of desire well up that agitate the mind, distract us, take away all of our calm collectedness immediately. We smell good food and we're not guarding our senses. If we're not guarding our eyes, we're not staying mindful, present, and consistent in our practice, then craving is going to be able to swoop in and get a hold of us. So we're secluding our senses, we're secluding ourselves from our world, because we recognize, because we humbly and wisely recognize how much power it does have over us. And wisely we reflect, if we practice these things, we can develop something inside of us. If we seclude ourselves from a world that doesn't have any answers from us, that also doesn't have any compassion for us most of the time, that definitely doesn't really care about us except how much money it can get from us, how it can swindle us, how it can use us as a stepping stool to prop itself up, or other people doing the same thing. There's a lot of harshness in our world. There doesn't have to be. We take more harshness out into the world and contribute to that harshness when we don't develop these kinds of practices, when we don't develop the heart. And the only way to develop them is to find seclusion. We have to have a secluded mind to achieve these states of calm. Dispassion. These enlightenment factors are supported by seclusion, dispassion, cessation, and ripen in relinquishment. So dispassion is to be dispassionate towards the sense desires, the things that we crave, to kind of lose the taste for them. And this doesn't happen unless we investigate. So we have to start with seclusion, get mindful, look closely at things, and steadily over time develop a perception of really look. And it can take a lot of work with some of our cravings, our strong ones, or we just fail time and time again. Man, I keep saying I'm not going to wake up at midnight and eat ice cream, and dang it, I do every other night. Just can't help myself. We got to investigate. We got to not judge ourselves or be disgruntled at the fact that we don't, just recognize how little strength and power we actually do have in some circumstances with some of these cravings and desires. Look very closely at them until we see how empty they are, how hollow they are, how impermanent they are. Doesn't matter how delicious or wonderful the experience is, it's impermanent. And when we really get in touch with that, that's where we can become dispassionate by it. We can even still have the preference for it and be like, yeah, man, I'd love me some peanut butter, but I'm not going to go out of my way for it because I'm just going to put it in my mouth and swallow it. And the experience that I crave is going to be gone. It's the experience that I derive pleasure from, even though it's kind of a weird flavor. It's kind of gross. Maybe it's not good for me. Really investigating in this way. Mostly looking at the impermanence of these things, looking at what do I even get out of this? In the long run, we get nothing out of them except an experience of a pleasure that we can have if we develop these 7 factors of enlightenment, these 4 foundations of mindfulness of breathing, this practice. Dispassion. Cessation, which ripens in relinquishment, is exactly what I just described. Finally letting go, finally coming to a place where, what, enough is enough. I know this experience in and out, through and through, up and down, and I can go without it now. I'm okay, I can be in here. This is a stoic solidarity, a strength of the human heart that only comes through true intimate knowledge and understanding that we individually ourselves have to go through with our stuff, not something we're going to read in a book, our stuff, the things that get us the most. We have to meditate with these things and be present with them and investigate them fully to their very end before we arrive at this dispassion where we can relinquish and finally let go of these things that are our chains, that are our bonds. Because that is how the 7 factors of enlightenment, developed and cultivated, fulfill true knowledge and deliverance. That is what the Blessed One said, and the bhikkhus were satisfied and delighted in the Blessed One's words. Sadhu, 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 anumodani, which I can explain later if you want. It means well done. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu is like, yes, yes, yes. And anumodani is basically like, I'm so grateful, or thank you, which is very much where my heart goes when I hear these teachings. When I finish a sutta, it's a traditional thing to say after talk of these kinds of teachings has concluded, is to say sadhu, 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 because it's so good to turn to these things and devote ourselves to them. It's hard. It takes an effort to bend our mind to angle ourselves at these truths because they're uncomfortable on a very serious level. So good for you for watching this. Good for all of us. Good for anybody. To the Buddha, thank you so much for bringing these teachings, and we are so grateful. Is the meaning of sadhu, 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 anumodani. I was going to backtrack. I felt like I kind of didn't quite touch on something that I wanted to all the way. I just wanted to reiterate that the Buddha has said, how do these 7 factors get us enlightened? And he's basically saying, that their support, mindfulness's support, all the 7 factors, the support for them, and the 4 foundations of mindfulness to do this breath work, to do anything, we have to have seclusion. We have to become a little bit dispassionate, or a lot dispassionate, to develop this strength where we're like, yeah, no, I don't need anything outside of me. Seclusion, dispassion, cessation, and relinquishment. This very beautiful, drifting apart, this settling, like a long, long journey of sand falling through the ocean, just slowly drifting and drifting, miles down, deep, deep and dark it can go, until finally we arrive at the bedrock of the ocean's floor, where we can just totally finally end our outward reaching. And the Buddha is saying, this is it, these things are what support these things, and in turn bring you to the end of this path. I will, I think, leave it there. I might follow up with one more short video, just to catch any loose ends on this sutta. And then I will post just a reading of this entire sutta. I won't add anything to it. I wouldn't feel right to add to the Buddha's words as spoken, especially now that, I've sort of built a framework around them, a good way to interpret what's being said, and not overlook them. Now that we've gone through these videos together, I want to be able to read these so that you can hear all of it in them. And then reach out to me in discussions. I can make copies, mail them to you, or email them to you, so that you can read it yourself, and have it on the back burner. Yeah, and I will see you then. Take care.